Blue Star, Mr. Manheim. Put all your clients in it. It's gonna move.
I don't know where you get your information, son, but I don't like it. The main thing about money, bud, it makes you do things you don't want to do.
Welcome to Money Unplugged. I'm Chris Hill. Thanks for being here on whatever podcast platform you happen to be listening on. Apple, Spotify, YouTube. If you like the show, do me a favor. Please give it a thumbs up or click some stars or whatever is the rating or review system on there. And thank you to any of you who have been listening to the audiobook version of Morgan Housel's new book, The Art of Spending Money. I know at least a few of you have been doing that because it ended up on Audible's weekly bestseller list. Yeah, number 5 on the nonfiction list, so thank you. It is humbling and also a little bit hilarious to see my name on the same list with Matthew McConaughey. Wasn't expecting that. Didn't have that on my bingo card. Today on the show, I talk with Paul Ollinger. He is a stand-up comedian and host of the podcast Reasonably Happy with Paul Ollinger. He also wrote a book of the same name. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk with him is before he did any of that, he was a straight-up businessman. He was an executive with Yahoo and then with Facebook. I didn't know him until this conversation, but he was every bit as thoughtful and introspective as I was hoping he would be. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk with him is because he has a few different things going on at any given time. He's got a Substack that he writes. He's got the podcast. He's a touring comedian. And one of the things I was curious about is how money informs his decision-making when it comes to these different endeavors. And we had some laughs too, which, I mean, he's a comedian. It would have been odd if we didn't have a few laughs. Paul is one of 6 kids in his family. They grew up in Atlanta. And I started the conversation the way I usually do by asking him if he had an early memory of money. So let's get into it with Paul Ollinger.
I do have an early memory of money. A lot of what informs my money outlook is being raised in a home. I joke about why I grind my teeth at night, and I said that maybe it's because I was raised Catholic by Depression-era parents during the Cold War. I think maybe that has something to do with my trifecta of Gen X anxiety. And my parents were very frugal. They were wonderful parents. The greatest privilege I've had in my life is being raised by 2 parents who stayed together for 55 years, wanted their kids, were committed to our education over their own material comfort. And but they were very frugal, washed and reused tinfoil and plastic bags. My dad used to stop the water in the shower halfway through so we could soap up. And, frugality was something that was kind of baked into us, and it informs my approach to money to this day.
I have not heard of the tactic of turning off the shower midway through to soap up.
Well, you didn't know Billy Ollinger, and I'm glad you didn't know that. That should be only for his family to know.
Was money discussed around the table? I mean, it sounds like if they were that frugal, then part of teaching your kids, we're going to wash off the tinfoil, we're going to wash out the plastic bag. This is why we're doing it, because this stuff costs money.
It wasn't so overtly spoken about. I know you've interviewed Morgan Housel, author of The Psychology of Money, and what a phenomenon that book was. And I just finished his new book, The Art of Spending Money. And in the very last chapter, which is probably the one that resonated even the most with me, he's talking about the example we set for our kids when it comes to money and other things in life. And even if you don't explicitly say it, your kids are watching. Your kids are watching your values. They're watching how you spend money. They're watching what you spend money on. They're watching how you react to your friends when they spend money, et cetera, et cetera. And so, I think about this a lot. And, I think maybe my mom and dad would say, maybe my mom more than my dad would say something like, hey, Mom, I want a Mattel electronic football, for Christmas. Well, we can't afford it. Or something like that. And I don't think she ever meant anything like you don't deserve it or anything like that, but can't afford it was one of those things that just kept coming back to me. 6 kids, My parents sent us to Catholic school because that's what their values were, and that cost money. That wasn't free, and it wasn't as much as it is today, but it was a significant portion of their income for all their 6 kids. And they weren't big believers in stuff. On some level, my parents, they never would have used the words, but they were conservationists because they just didn't buy stuff because they thought stuff was a lot of waste. And they were, as I say, frugal, but they just didn't want to instill things like you need things to be happy. And, but something like, we can't afford it probably made its way into my head a little bit more than my mother intended it to. And I think there was a bit of scarcity, a bit of fear that entered my brain as well.
What was the first job you had when you were a kid?
Oh, well, I did a lot of cutting grass of our neighbor's grass. I went over to my new neighbor's house and said, "I'll cut your grass free one time if you want me to." I was pitching early. I was probably 14, and so I cut a few yards in the neighborhood to make spending money. And if we were going to the movies or something, I very rarely did my parents, not spot me $8 for the movie or whatever. Now, they might not buy the popcorn, but I don't remember not being able to do a lot of things because of money. I eventually scooped ice cream. This is a very 1985 job. I scooped ice cream at the Haagen-Dazs in the food court at Perimeter Mall in Atlanta, in Dunwoody, Georgia, which was, I remember hearing Prince, Raspberry Beret. We used to sing it as Raspberry Sorbet because we actually sold that at the Haagen-Dazs stand. So it was a very 80s place, and I'd have a visor that I put over my luxurious hair that I had at the time, which is long since gone, as anybody who's watching on YouTube can attest.
Let's move on to college then.
Yeah.
So Rhodes College.
Correct.
Degree in economics?
BA in business and economics. If you were a straight up econ major, you had to take econometrics, and that scared me. So I did the joint BA business econ degree, which allowed me to get econ onto my resume without taking econometrics.
That's smart. When
or not smart.
Well, I'm
it's crafty.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it's absolutely crafty. Well done.
Thank you.
But I am curious, sort of like when does that light bulb go on for you? Because there are some people who get to college and they start fishing around for a degree, and some know right out of the gate what they want. Some people sort of take a little time and think like, I'm just going to do this because it is probably not going to be my career path, but I'm going to enjoy this degree and do well in this topic. And I'm curious sort of what and when the interest in finance and business was sparked for you.
Early, very, very early. I mean, I was the kid, and I think this is a reaction to sort of that frugality that I, in my mind, developed a theory, which was one of several theories, by the way. Some of them more positive and helpful than others. But the theory was, if I make a lot of money someday, then I won't have to stress about money, and I will be happy. And that was a reaction to, I see my parents saying we can't afford things. They're obviously stressed. And I ended up asking, the best interview I've ever done on my podcast is the one I did with my dad when he was 82 or so. Sorry, like 90, maybe 90 or 92. And I asked him about that. I said, if you made 25% more money, would you have been less stressed? And he said, less stress? I never remember being stressed about money. I told my brother that, and he almost drove off the road. Because it was such a subtext to our, growing up. But I developed this theory, like, I'm going to succeed at school, because if I succeed at school, I can go to a good college. If I go to a good college, I can get a good job, and then I'll make money, and then I'll be happy. And so that was always like, I was the guy. I studied hard in high school because I wanted to succeed. And there's probably a lot of other things in there, like becoming my own person relative to my siblings and my older brothers. Like, I wanted to stand out and all those kinds of things as well. So going to majoring in business was sort of I'm going to do this because that's how you get a good corporate job. And it is again, my parents they're very practical people. You're going to go to college because the point of college is to learn skills that will allow you to earn a living thereafter.
What's the plan after you graduate from Rhodes College with your degree in business and not quite economics?
Sort of economics. My first job, I went to work for the Ernest and Julio Gallo Career Management Development Program. They hire a lot of especially kind of like athletes and student leaders, to go and work at distributorships around the country, learn the wine business, and then go into corporate. I did that for a year and then went back to my college and raised money for 3 years in the development office. And that wasn't sort of a plan. It was like, okay, I'm going to take a step back and figure things out, figure out what I want to do. And at a certain point, I was like, I'd already gotten myself into trouble with broken down cars and credit cards and things like that. And I was like, hey, you know what? Being broke really does suck. And my dad had given me the gift, it's that gift where I graduated from college, and he handed me a list and he said, here's the pocket change you've borrowed from me over the past 3 years. Please commence payment immediately. My parents did me the great gift. They gave me the great gift of graduating from college without debt. And I contributed nothing to that, to my living expenses over time, but I had borrowed money from my dad, and he was like, you're going to pay this back and there's no more money. And so I was on my own. I was an adult, and I had to figure it out. And I figured out very quickly that not having money, not having the power of being able to pay for a date's, omelet at brunch is a crappy way to live. And you discover very quickly, after the somewhat democratic lifestyle in college, you get out of school and you start to see some people making money and some people making less money. As a man, I was like, oh, women seem to prefer guys who have cash. I wonder if that's a thing. And there turns out to be some evolutionary evidence that it is a thing. And so if you can't pay for a date's omelet, you're going to have very little chance to impress her with witty repartee.
Is that at least partially what informs your decision to go to graduate school and get an MBA?
Totally. So I was like, I'm in this trouble financially. I don't know how to get out of it. I think I should borrow $80,000 more to figure it out. And
right.
So that's what I did. I mean, my thought was, I need to figure out what I want to do with my life career-wise. And I don't know how to make a power move from this educational fundraising thing. And by the way, if you're at the top of the educational fundraising business, you earn quite a decent living. It just wasn't the industry that I wanted to stay in. And I didn't know what that was. I went to business school, both because I wanted to make more money, and secondly, as a way to kind of figure out really what I wanted to do and surround myself with very smart people. And when I got there, I told jokes one night at a talent show after having borrowed $80,000 in $1995. And I found out that I wanted to be a stand-up comedian. And that is not the career you want to decide on when you're hoping to maximize your long-term income.
Yeah, there aren't really any graduate degrees in stand-up comedy, as far as I can tell.
Somebody will start one, because it seems like people are just suckers for... I've been talking about happiness for 6 years. There's Masters of Happiness degrees that you can go online and purchase for yourself for $17,000. And I'm like, what kind of huckster snake oil can I come up with to line my pockets that people will buy?
So how do you go from, you graduate from Dartmouth in the late 1990s with an MBA. Walk me through sort of the Cliff Notes version of getting out to Silicon Valley and working for the likes of Yahoo and Facebook, because certainly the late 90s, the early 2000s, that's a very interesting and exciting time to be at companies like that.
It was, and I didn't know, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but when I got there and I saw Dartmouth at the top of my resume, I thought I can go anywhere, I can do anything. And this, and I could have done that before, but, maybe I'm of a generation that thinks credentials are the way to open doors as opposed to will and drive and all that kind of stuff. And perhaps there's some combination of the two. But I wanted to do something cool. I wanted to do something I was passionate about. And even though I couldn't go do stand-up comedy right away because I had this debt hanging over my head, I was like, I still want to do something great. And I did those interviews on campus for the Well, I never did the investment banking interviews. I did do an interview with McKinsey that lasted for 5 minutes. The guy asked me how I would estimate the population of Yugoslavia or something, and I said I'd look it up on Wikipedia, and that That was the end of because Wikipedia didn't even exist at the time, so he didn't know what I was talking about. But that was not a case. That was not a case interview strategy that they admired at McKinsey. So I was still grasping at straws so much, and I did all the brand management interviews, and Procter and Gamble. They really liked what I had to say in the first couple of interview rounds, and then they sent me that personality test, and I sent it back, and it was like one of those Bugs Bunny things where you put something in the mailbox and close it, and then immediately the fist comes through the mailbox, and here's the answer, and it was Procter and Gamble saying, "We don't want you. Don't ever come to Cincinnati. Don't step foot on our, And my classmate's dad was the CEO at the time, and I spoke at graduation. And afterwards, he came up to me and he said, "That was such a great talk. What are you going to do next year?" And I didn't have the heart to tell him that I was going to do that I didn't get hired by his company. So anyway, after graduation, I'd finally gotten this job notice in the Career Center. Now, going back to 1997, we didn't have Indeed.com. There were binders of jobs in the career office that would be submitted electronically to the school. And there was this job to be the vice president of East Coast sales for a monthly CD-ROM, a magazine business model, where they needed somebody to come to New York and open up their office. And at this point, I had been going down to New York City most Fridays to do informational interviews with anybody who would talk to me in the media business. Judy Fearing, who was the senior vice president of marketing at ESPN at the time, Russell Wolf, who was a big deal at ESPN, and I think he was at MTV before that. These were Tuck grads that opened up their calendar for me, and they introduced me to a lot of other people. I would take any interview I could get, but eventually I was like, maybe advertising sales is what I should be doing. And I found that job at Launch.com, which became Launch.com. It wasn't even a website at the time. But it was music, CD-ROM, interviews with movie stars, and it was ad-supported, a magazine business model. There were so few people available to work in 1997 with experience that they actually hired me. And I was so desperate for a job that I actually went with them, because who the hell wants a job at a CD-ROM company, right? But we found each other, and these guys were some of the greatest guys I could have hoped to have worked with. I'm still friends with many of them today. So Launch.com was the first place I worked out of business school. We did the typical, startup thing in 97, 98 or 99. We go public, we crash in 2000, lay off, 3 rounds of layoffs, and Yahoo rescues us off the ash heap of the dot-com meltdown. But for those of us that were fortunate enough to go to work at Yahoo, that company was also at its nadir and just beginning its resurrection phase under the leadership of Dan Rosenzweig and Terry Semel and Wenda Harris Millard. And so it was a great place to be, because the concept of advertising on the internet prior to 2000, 2001 was just like, we're going to put your ad up and it's going to be seen by all these eyeballs. And it was like, well, there's no measurement, there's no tracking, there was no accountability. Yet when Google came along, all of a sudden you could spend $1 and get $2 back. Well, what advertiser, what marketer isn't going to buy as much as that as they want? And we started to develop more ways of saying, hey, internet advertising is like print advertising. You're going to put your beautiful artwork next to relevant content, and it's going to be seen by a lot of people. And over time, we got things like targeting and tracking and things that could give advertisers confidence that there was value to be mined in internet marketing and advertising. And I was part of that phase from 01 to 05. And it was an exciting time, and the Yahoo stock appreciated significantly during that time. And so
to what extent did your childhood hope of more money equaling more happiness, did that come true?
Yeah. There's a lot of studies. I know you've probably read Kahneman and Deaton and Killingsworth and all these people about money and happiness. And there's a lot of truth to when you're broke, life's not that fun. When you're stressing about cash before you're brushing your teeth in the morning, that your day's not going to be as good as if you wake up and you're like, you're not focused on whether or not you can buy your kids some ramen that day or pay your rent that month. So it was great to to just have spending money at first and to be able to pay my rent and then to be able to, I had a roommate for the first 3.5 years out of school, and he's still one of my closest friends, but I enjoyed living by myself for the first time in my life and being able to, drive a cool car for the first time in my life and things like that, and pay for dates. And eventually I paid off my student loans, way early. And I talk about even all the success I've had working at Facebook, making way more money than I ever imagined. The richest I've ever felt is the day I paid off my student loans. That was the greatest feeling because I was finally my own person. Having a net worth of zero felt liberating.
So I need to share a conversation I had with a friend of mine. He listens to the show. He was asking me questions about different guests. And by the way, you can ask questions too if you want. You can drop an email, info@moneyunpluggedpod.com, if you have questions about the show or just things you want to share. info@moneyunpluggedpod.com. I'll put it in the show notes. Anyway, we're talking, and at one point he says, "Hey, do you really eat that chili garlic crunch? You talk about Marmar like you eat it all the time." And I laughed and I looked him right in the eye and I said, "Yeah, that's because I do eat it all the time. I have 2 jars of Marmar in my home. One is open and the other is a backup so that I don't run out. I put it in my breakfast tacos. I spread it on bread when I'm making a sandwich. I add it to pasta sauce, pizza. If I'm making stir fry, I'll throw some in there. It makes everything I add it to taste better." Go to ilovemarmar.com, use the promo code MONEY, and get 10% off. And the sooner you do that, the sooner your world is going to get tastier. I'm telling you, it's like nothing else that you are currently using when you're making whatever it is that you like to eat. Click the link in the show notes or go to ilovemarmar.com. Get 10% off when you use the promo code MONEY. All right, let's get back to Paul. How much did you and your wife talk about money before you got married?
Some. We come from different backgrounds. She's an only child, which, by the way, I didn't get enough attention. She got too much. And so everybody's, Brad Klontz talks about money scripts. And I think there's also family scripts, that we are programmed based on what we witnessed growing up in our homes, both in the way our parents spent money, but in the circumstances. And yeah, I think one of 6 kids, I probably wanted a little more attention, and she wanted probably to be a little bit more anonymous. And we came from different, spending traditions as well. And her parents have their own backgrounds that were less frugal than mine. And so these things still show up 17 years into marriage.
Before we get to the speed round, I do want to ask you this question because you're, in your current professional life, you wear several different hats. You're obviously a stand-up comedian. You host a podcast. You've written a couple of books. To what extent, if any, does money factor into your professional decision-making? Whether or not to take a gig for comedy, whether or not it's to write another book. How much does money factor into all of that for you?
It probably should factor more. I think sometimes lack of money is a good clarifier, and that sometimes if you really need to prioritize money, you're probably making better decisions. Sometimes I get paid $20,000 to do a corporate talk. Sometimes I make $25 to do comedy. Most of the stuff is much closer to the middle, but I don't think too much about the cash. I think about the opportunity, and what do I have? Do I have an opportunity to do more of what I want to do? Do I have an opportunity to grow and learn? And also, who's writing the check, right? If it's another comedian who's producing a show in a bar, they don't have corporate advertisers that are paying them tens of thousands of dollars to share with their vendors. So I do what I do what feels exciting to me. And, it's not hell yes or no when it comes to money, but it's sort of like, if I want to do it, I'm going to do it. And writing books, very, very few people make money writing books. I write because I find the process of taking an issue and tearing it apart and putting it back together again to be intellectually very satisfying. I'm working on an article right now for my Substack called The Hilarious World of Estate Planning, because my wife and I, we moved to New York a year and change ago, and we're updating our wills and trusts and healthcare powers of attorney, because that's what you got to do if you don't want New York State to take 15%, God forbid. By the way, God forbid is the thing my attorney said the most in our, $800 an hour conversation that I had with him. Because you have to answer all these crazy questions. Like, well, let's say you and your wife and both kids all die in a plane crash. Who gets the money? And you're like, oh, this is fun. This is a great process. But I think that's really interesting is like when you're that college kid and you're like, I want to make more money because I'll be happier. You don't think about wills and trusts and catastrophe clauses in your will. It's like, so I'm working on that article because it's interesting, not because I'm going to make any money writing it.
I look forward to reading that because my wife and I are going through that process right now of updating all of that.
What process brings egregious tax policy, generally accepted accounting principles, and your own mortality to bear in one conversation?
And, if you have children, then it's the whole, okay, who's going to raise your kids? And then you have that agonizing conversation. And then, I don't know if you've gone through this, but then the question was, okay, so you've gone through the gut-wrenching decision of the couple that's going to raise your kids. Now, what happens if they get divorced? And it's like, really? I got to navigate their marriage too?
It's infinite contingencies that, will likely never happen, but could. There's a catastrophe clause in these wills because families do die together. Parents take trips and they die together. And you have to think this stuff through, lest you let the state of New York or, your next of kin just make major decisions on your behalf.
Let's move off mortality. Let's go to the speed round. What is a thing that you have bought that makes you happy? Oh
man. I can't remember the name brand, but I bought this cardboard cutter, this automatic cardboard cutter. I don't know the brand, but it's this tool. It's like it's got a circular blade, and you can, with great speed and ease, cut big packages from Amazon down into digestible, carryable chunks. And few things bring order to a chaotic world in the way that my new cardboard cutter does.
That's fantastic.
I don't know how much it costs, but it was worth twice what I paid for it.
Have you ever made a purchase that you regret and every once in a while you still think about it?
A big part of my life is regret avoidance. And Housel talks about this in the new book a lot too. There's a lot of things that have gone right and a lot of things that have gone wrong about this move to New York City from Atlanta, where we were for the last 13 years. But I still don't regret it. Becoming a comedian and doing what I do every day is an ongoing practice in regret avoidance, because I didn't want to have the deathbed regret of what would have happened if I gave it my all. I didn't want to have that question. And I'm learning the answer to that question. And by the way, when you get the answer to one question, you don't get the answer to another question, which is, what if I'd stayed at Facebook and stayed in corporate management? I'd be worth hundreds of millions of dollars, probably, no joke. But would that make me happier? I don't know, but I can't think of anything I would rather do than the things I do every day. More to your point, I once bought a watch because I thought other people would be impressed. I have some very nice watches, and then I've got one that's sort of absurdly fancy. And I bought that absurdly fancy one because I thought people would think it was cool. And I wore it around my best friends, and they didn't even mention it. And my feelings were hurt so deeply by my best friends, and yet so accurately. So it was like, oh, I don't need this watch. I don't. And the watch game, I like watches. I like nice stuff. We take nice trips. I've never bought a trip. I don't regret any of the wonderful travel we've done. That might be equally as expensive or elaborate as this watch, but like this watch didn't bring me anywhere near the amount of joy that I thought it was going to bring me. And I realized that the watch game is one of those games where it's like war games. The only way to win is not to play or to not put a whole lot of value on it.
What is one thing about money that you wish you knew earlier in life?
That comparison never stops. And I don't know what I would have done with this information earlier, but the one thing that is true at all levels of wealth is that we compare ourselves to people who have more than we do. And the only way for that to not drive you crazy is to develop an attitude of enoughness. And just reflecting when you think you want something that somebody else has, just reflecting on how much you have that satisfies your needs. My most elaborate luxury is doing the thing that I want to do with my life, and having this conversation with you instead of trying to pitch somebody else advertising. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but because it's not what I want to do. It's not how I want to express who I am with however much time I have left.
What is the last thing you splurged on just for yourself, not for your wife or your kids? Or
I don't splurge on myself. I'm such a good person that I only splurge on other people, and I give most of my money away. I joined a club in New York City. I was very excited to join, and I'm excited about that. And I don't really think about it as splurging, but we do take very nice vacations, and it is splurging. And those are not necessarily just for me, but when you travel with your kids and when you get to travel a certain way, you get to spend time with them in ways that are fleeting and finite. And I want to take advantage of however much time we have while they're still at home.
What is a charitable cause that you like to support?
I like to support literacy. And there's a school in Atlanta. There's an organization called Read Source in Atlanta that takes the resources of one of the top schools for children with dyslexia in the country and brings them to the community. When my daughter was diagnosed with dyslexia, we were fortunate to have, I don't know what it was, $38,000, $40,000 a year to send her to this outstanding school. And it occurred to me that dyslexia is a very, very big problem in our country, and very few people have the resources necessary to remediate it in their own child. And if we could bring it to more people, there would be fewer people in prison. There would be a lot more people out there working and happy and raising families on a sustainable wage.
Do you have a favorite movie or TV series that has money as a through line?
I still can't stop thinking about Wall Street. I think about Wall Street once a week.
Wow.
I'm serious. I was thinking yesterday about, and maybe it's just because this is the stuff I read and I write about and I care about. But, there's that scene where Hal Holbrook puts his arm around Charlie Sheen, and Charlie's been in the news a bit lately.
Yes.
And so the contrast to this kid that he plays and who he's become, and I'm not judging Charlie, and I think what he's doing recently as a sober person and as that he is sober and that he's sharing his journey with people, I think that's generally positive. But here he is. Here, Hal Holbrook puts his arm around Bud Fox and says, the main thing about money, Bud, is it makes you do things you don't want to do. And there's that movie, which Oliver Stone made as a protest piece against high finance, by the way, and had the counter effect of making a whole generation of guys want to go to Wall Street, right? But there's so many life lessons about money it's a morality tale from beginning to end on so many different levels. And you can watch it and still pick out stuff you didn't see or haven't thought about in a long, long time.
The last thing is a penny for your thoughts. And this is just any sort of wisdom you've picked up along the way in your life that you can share with people who are listening? It can be about money, but it doesn't have to be. It can be about anything.
The opposite of broke isn't rich. The opposite of broke is not broke. And that goes back to what I was saying about student loans, is that what we should be preaching and teaching and modeling for our fellow citizens and the next generation is the deep satisfaction that comes with financial autonomy, not a saccharine type high that comes with luxuries that are what people prioritize. I spoke with Daniel Crosby, financial behavioralist, PhD, and we were talking about how our brains inevitably compare and unavoidably compare ourselves to what we see around us. And there's this statistic in his book. I think he said that the average net worth of the top 10 followed Instagram accounts was like $400 million, but I think it's more like $700 million. It's an absurd amount of money. And the fact that whether we can somehow in a second go, oh, I know, well, that's Kim Kardashian, she's not like me. And yet we still compare ourselves to her and to people like her because our brains don't know the difference. I don't know who the Kim Kardashian of, the millionaire next door is, but it'd be cool to have somebody like that kind of influence what we're seeing on social media and on the television.
There you go. Check out Paul's podcast, Reasonably Happy, and find him on tour. Go see some live comedy. There's nothing like it. You can see all of his performing dates on his website, which is paulollinger.com. I'm Chris Hill. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week.